Hi everybody, Gary Sinclair. All right, so most of us would prefer not to be called a fool, right? But I doubt we would feel complimented being termed a wise guy or wise girl either. See, to be called a fool sounds like people think we're stupid. And the wise guy or person label refers to a smart aleck type who arrogantly says things to make themselves look better or someone else appear worse. But see, neither definition is accurate. The word fool doesn't imply that a person isn't smart. There are lots of smart fools. Instead, a fool is someone who, smart or not so knowledgeable, hasn't learned to turn their content into application, wisdom, though they can usually fool people pretty easily. And a genuine wise person does apply truth and general knowledge to everyday life. They have more than information. They bring insight. Wise people think as much as they act. They ponder more than they play. What are the wise people like? What do they do and not do? Well, here are several outcomes of wise people's attitudes and actions versus a fool's. Proverbs 18:2 says, "A fool takes no pleasure in understanding, but only in expressing his opinion." See, our culture has a growing disdain for the truth and listening to others. People share their opinions, often without support or evidence, and yet broadcast it to the world online. How many stories online have you and I thought to be true that were just made up or horribly inaccurate? Then add Proverbs 1:7, "Fools despise wisdom and instruction." Proverbs 29 says, "If a wise person has an argument with a fool, the fool only rages and laughs, and there is no quiet." How many everyday people, not merely the fringe, are raging and laughing at the pain of others? Wise people don't do that no matter the circumstances. Or Proverbs 10:23 adds, "Doing wrong is like a joke to a fool." Proverbs 14:16 says, "One who is wise is cautious and turns away from evil, but a fool is reckless and careless." We definitely today have once wise people accepting all sorts of untruths as true and then carelessly publishing them as though they're legit, or recklessly doing damage to places and even endorsing the killing of people as though that was deserved. See, Psalm 53 adds, "The fool says in his heart, there is no God." They're corrupt, doing abominable iniquity. Maybe that's the core problem, a turning away, not just from following God, but even believing he exists. See, as a result, the rules and guidelines that we once stood on as a culture are being thrown out the window. Right and wrong are all debatable now. And the abominable can happen, except that it's no longer abominable, just acceptable. Which is why in Proverbs 14:9 it says, "Fools mock at guilt." Of course, there are way more characteristics and negatives, in some cases beyond our understanding, when foolish people carry out foolish behaviors and attitudes. But what should wise people do? Does wisdom have what it takes to overcome foolishness? Absolutely. But it will be an emotional, intellectual, and spiritual battle. And first, we've got to be committed to following God's guidelines, making sure we're accurate about what he intends and doesn't intend. See, we can't buy into responses that merely sound good online. We must make sure we're hearing the truth, not someone's tainted or even perspective that has little grounding in the truth. We need to do our homework, too, starting with God's word, so we more easily see the falsehoods. Second, we need to speak out against foolish principles and influences. We don't need to yell, call people names, or use physical force. We don't need to destroy things. That just makes us foolish. But we've got to respond strategically with research, facts, and clarity in hand when we see foolish thinking and demands being put on our neighborhoods and schools and workplaces and, of course, government. We must be willing to express our dissent when schools, leaders, bosses, even churches present false information or require things of our children and grandkids that are mere folly. And yet we can speak the truth in love. We must go before those making decisions and who we believe are open to change. Ideally, building relationships beforehand will keep doors open, maybe already open, that cold contacting won't. And we can't lower our methods to those of the foolish. Proverbs 26:4 says, "Don't answer a fool according to their folly, lest you also be like them yourself." And remember Proverbs' admonition to not speak in the hearing of a fool. See, those who are already entrenched in lies probably aren't going to suddenly become noble. We can model Charlie Kirk, who is one of the best at inviting conversation over conflict, shutting down the angst of the questioners with fair, accurate, and true information inserted into the dialogue. We can do the same, maybe in smaller ways, but possibly just as effective. And third, we ought to give to and support organizations that are purveyors of truth, inviters of discussion, and willing to stand in the public square against foolish rhetoric, demands, and deception. Supporting groups can also include ending associations or membership with those that aren't honest and willing to have dialogues. Our responses need to hurt a bit, emotionally, socially, economically, and personally. The First Amendment is in the Constitution to keep the government from punishing free speech. But it's not a guarantee for those who speak harmful speech, illegal speech, that no one can stop or punish it. Leaders have the right to say no, and that enough is enough. And then fourth, maybe most importantly, pray. Pray like crazy. We're not just in a social, economic, intellectual battle, though those are all areas involved. We all are also in a spiritual conflict, good versus evil, right versus wrong, mankind versus God. 2 Corinthians 4 says that Satan has blinded the minds of the unbelievers. No wonder so much of the rhetoric and responses make no sense. The good news is that God's going to win. The bad news is that the clashes can turn bloody. In fact, they already have. Remember, foolish people don't care. They aren't impacted by hurting others and likely have little, if any, conscience. But be encouraged that Proverbs 5 says the boastful will not stand before God's eyes. See, God's going to win this and other battles against truth and what is right. But we can model, and we need to model, and stand for wisdom because we're part of the battle. We can do something. I'll end with these words of Jesus from John 16:33. In this world, you have trouble, but take heart. I've overcome the world. Talk to you next time.